Have you ever driving a car without power steering? You have to run the wheel several rotations just to get a small response from the car. Our brains response to change like cars without power steering. Each iteration results in a negligible difference but repeated consistently. These small iterations can create a big change in your brain and your life. Your subconscious brain love efficiency. This is why we have habit. When you repeat a behavior over time, your brain learns to automate the process. It's more energy efficient to automatically do something than to manually weigh your options and decide to act the same way every time. When you make a decision very quickly, it is probably from habit. Even if you think you are actively deciding in a way, you made the decision a while ago. Choosing your favorite ice cream flavors is one example. Slow changing stable brains. The human brain is slow changing and stable. It has routines and a framework that allow to respond consistently to the world. having slow changing Having slow changing brain is frustrating at time, but overall it's highly beneficial. Imagine if your personality and life could transform overnight. You would go crazy. Once you successfully develop new healthy habits, every time becomes easier. You can get and eat your healthy breakfast and go to the gym every morning automatically instead of conducting a drawn out battle with your brain. You can do the right things with little effort. For example, this feels like a daydream. They only know the dark side of stability, how the brain compels them to eat junk food, watch TV, smoke, bite their nails. But good habits are as amazing as bad habits are dreadful. I know uh, I know exercise is a habit for me because my identity has changed with it. It would feels odd and unsatisfying in a that not me kind of ways if I didn't go to the gym a few times per week last year. However, my identity was as a person who did just enough to stay in average shape. Both scenarios emerge from habit 75, since 45% of our behavior is automatic regardless of what we do. We might as well make it beneficial to our lives and goals. In order to do that expertly, we need to understand the two primary players in the brain: a stupid repeater and a smart manager. Most of our brain is stupid. Well, not yours specifically. A certain parts of human brain is stupid in the sense that it doesn't consider lungs cancer while you smoke, or the purse of great apps before you exercise. Worse, this is the strong part of your brain that usually gets its way long term. It recognizes and repeat patterns until told otherwise. It's called the basal ganglia. There's another section of your brain, however, that is really smart. It's called the prefrontal cortex, and it's located behind your forehead. It's the manager that understand long-term benefits and consequences, and thankfully it has the ability to override the basal ganglia. It handles short-term thinking and decision making too. Just now we covered the two critical tools involved in habit change: the basal ganglia and the prefrontal cortex. I like the way psychologist Dr. David Noble differentiates the prefrontal cortex from the rest of the brain. He says that everything except the prefrontal cortex determines what is, and the prefrontal cortex focusing on what could be. The only way to create habit is to teach the rest of your brain to like what the prefrontal cortex want. The prefrontal cortex is what resists chocolate cake. It, if at all possible, want to learn French, want to be fit, and would like to write a book someday. It's the conscious part of your brain that would identify as you, but the problem is that it tries out easily, perhaps more accurately, because its functions are so powerful. It's an energy hawk that tries you out, and when you tire out or stress, as we covered, the repetition part takes over. The basal ganglia isn't conscious or aware of higher level goals that are unique to human, but it is an efficient pattern repeater that saves us energy. So while it may not be intelligent like the prefrontal cortex, it is an incredibly important part of the brain, and once we train the basal ganglia to do positive behaviors, automatically we really going to love it. This is the system we all have to work with. It sounds poorly designed at first, as the smart prefrontal cortex has less stamina than the thoughtless repeating basal ganglia does, but it's actually brilliant when you know how to work it. How do clever weaklings overcome their dumb, strong counterpart? I'll give you a hint. It's not through brute physical force. I am sure you already know that, perhaps because you are now recalling the failed attempts of your conscious mind to control your subconscious by brute force or willpower. The answer, of course, is to employ smart strategies to overcome the prefrontal cortex natural weakness. The prefrontal cortex, your defense against automated behavior. In order to understand the prefrontal cortex better, we are going to look at what happens when it's gone. How does a brain operate without one? Not well. The upcoming study shows what the prefrontal cortex does, as well as what the rest of the brain does. When you remove something, you can see the impact of what it did and also how the parts operate without its influence. Francis Letermet was a French neurologist who examined patients with damaged frontal lobes. What he found in the following study was evidence that the brain operation changes drastically without its manager, the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the frontal lobes. There are two groups of the interest in Letterman study: people with damaged frontal lobes and people with the healthy frontal lobes. In the experiment, the subject would sit across from an examiner who asks interview style question who asks interview style questions. The examiner task was to display indifference to the interview, refuse to respond to their questions, and occasionally perform random and puzzling gestures. He thumbed his nose, giving a military salute, fold paper and put it into an envelope, chew paper, sing tap his leg, whimper, and more. Science is funny. Here's what they found. Healthy loop pupil, as one would expect, found his behavior odd. In purely scientific terms, the response was, "What wrong with this dude?" Many of the younger participants laughed, and when asked if they thought to imitate him, they said, "No, not at all." But here's where it gets very interesting. Almost all people with frontal lobes damage did intimate the examiner absurd gesture. They intimate him with great precision and without fail. For example, the man willingly urinated on the wall in front of others without any hint of surprise or concern when they lack the ability to imitate him exactly, such as not having paper to fold or chew. They were set to find ways to compensate perfectly. From the study, when interviewed after an examination, all damaged loop patient could remember the examiner gestures, and when questioned as to be reason for their initiative behavior, replied that because the examiner had made the gesture, they felt they had to imitate him. On being told that they had not been told to imitate the gesture, their answer was that obviously, since the gesture had been made, they must be imitated after being told not to imitate. Most patients displayed the same IB imitation behavior. Those with damaged frontal lobes couldn't help but imitate the interviewer even when asked not to. With damaged frontal lobes, it appears people lose the ability to make override decision over their subconscious mind. The subconscious is almost like a different entity, a machine. Also interesting is that the normal participant forgets some of the gesture of the examiner, but those with damaged frontal lobes remember every single one. This suggests that the preference of healthy frontal lobes, which again contain the essential prefrontal cortex, steals some of our focus away from subconscious pattern recognition and can inhibit or initiate behavior. This is why we call it the manager. It oversees automated operation and step in when it sees something that could be done better. Now, for the flip side, what happens when it's the basal ganglia that isn't functioning properly? The basal ganglia, your pattern detector. Your brain basal ganglia is technically a group of nuclei that act as a single unit and plays a central role in habit formation and procedural learning. But research also indicates that the brain mainly system many systems interact with each other in complex ways, and the basal ganglia can't necessarily be isolated as being the habit part of the brain. Neuroscience, while helpful, cannot completely explain exactly how the brain works. That not to say it's deceitful or inaccurate, but rather a small glimpse into a big mystery. The brain working are so intricate and complex that modern science still has a lot to learn. They said knowing the basal ganglia is the main player in habit formation is useful when combined with experience, experimentation, and good sense. Our limited knowledge of the brain working is a powerful ally for personal growth. Hermit study on the people with dysfunctional or damaged frontal lobes showed us the importance of the executive functions of the brain, which can prevent us from robotically doing undesirable things. But what happens when it's the basal ganglia that damage or damage or functioning improperly? There's a study on that too. It suggests that a damage or malfunctioning basal ganglia cause you to lose your ability to have any habit. Researchers gather people of three classification: healthy people, Parkinson disease patient, and those with memory problem. Parkinson disease patients are those whose brains struggle to deliver the neurotransmitter dopamine to the basal ganglia due to the cell death. This caused dysfunctional of the basal ganglia. Participants were given four cards with random shapes on them and asked to predict whether each card meant rain, or sunshine. It would be very difficult to consciously from relationship between the cause and the results, but there was a subtle pattern that could be picked up subconsciously. There were 50 trials, and after about 10 trials, both normal participant and memory loss participant gradually improved their guessing percentage from 50 to 65, 70%. Their subconscious mind picked up the pattern that suggests rain or sunshine. The the Parkinson disease participants, however, did not improve from 50 without a healthy basal ganglia. Their brain couldn't detect pattern, and thus it would be the hard for them to develop new habit. For these studies, we can see the brain is it vastly oversimplified terms, a two-part system of executive decision making and pattern recognition for automatic behavior. The management functions of the prefrontal cortex can be dynamic and responsive, but they are use up a lot of energy and willpower. The automatic formations of the basal ganglia are effective and efficient. They save us energy and take care of the tasks that don't need constant monitoring. This leads into the next important consideration: how do we get ourselves to do things consistently with these two brain components? Before a behavior becomes habit, the two ways to get yourself going are motivations and willpower. Before you read this next chapter, say your final goodbyes to motivation because you are not going to need it anymore. Motivations versus willpower. Emotions will either serve or master, depends on who is in charge. Jim Rohn. I'm about to unleash fury on motivation as a starting strategy, but motivation and willpower aren't such either or strategies. They have an important relationship with each other that the chart below shows. The basic premise of this chapter is not that motivation is a bad habit, but that is it's an unreliable strategy for lasting change. Now, before you interrupt me to ask, hey, where are the mini habits? Give me a moment to explain. I've created a simple chart on the next page to show the relationship between the willpower and the motivation. Chart explanation: motivation is the x axis and willpower cause the y axis. When motivation is at its peak, lower right corner, willpower cost is zero or negligible. That's because you don't need to force yourself to do something you already want to do. But when motivation drops to zero, a strong internal resistance means that the willpower cost is high, upper left corner, where willpower cost is 100 and motivation is zero. More about this relationship will be discussed in the willpower section, but all you need to know for now is that when you are not motivated to do something, the willpower cost skyrockets, and when willpower cost is high, it makes it difficult for you to sustain a behavior over time and build it into a habit. Now let's take a hard look at getting motivated, which dominates self-help literature despite being completely ineffective long term. The many problem with getting motivated. Does getting motivated work? The answer is adding something. At times you can conjure up the motivational to exercise or write 200 words, but other time you might end up taking a nap, watching TV, or drinking beer instead. This is a huge problem because if getting motivated is your strategy, you can't build habit.